Ever since the dawn of time, man has sought to create the perfect choose-your-own-adventure game. The very foundation of D&D is in player choice, improvisation, and the full embrace of role-playing. Such is the nature of video game design, to give the player freedom to choose their starting point and create their path forward, or at least to be the one to make changes to the world from within those boxes. Baldur's Gate 3 does all three by asking us an important question both philosophically and for practical considerations.
Who are you?
It's a role-playing game in the true sense of the term, or so I've been told, and that you can really choose the character that you want to play. Selecting an origin goes beyond editing cosmetic presets to include an entire character history. You can mold their attitudes and perceptions in conjunction with actions that directly shape the fate of the world that they inhabit. You can be a lover or a fighter and everything in between. Few video games ever made have had moment-to-moment choices that feel as consequential as Baldur's Gate 3. Whether through manipulation or randomization, everything you do forces an outcome that is simultaneously one of many and one of one in its uniqueness. Never forgetting the most central component of a story, BG3's true achievement is providing a novel experience for every conflict resolution from beginning to end and everything in the middle. Few tactical RPGs have inspired such experimentation and strategizing as the game that lets you battle an entire army at once, with the same level of authority and influence on the story outcome as if you kindly persuade them to jump off a cliff to their own death. It's a video game with perhaps a rare, perfect blend of creative choices and scripted sequences. BG3 is equal parts narrative experience and tactical brain teaser, the true soul of video games, and the absolute pinnacle of modern role-playing in the sense of choosing your own character and remaining as devoted or as devious to that structure as you desire. Although there truly is no such thing as choose your own adventure in full, D&D on these terms is perhaps as close as you can get to creating and maintaining a role in a video game setting. There is always a dungeon master that sets some parameters such as the setting and premise, like a game designer sets boundaries through coding and mechanics. In BG3, we have the Mind Flayer plot, paced in a 3-act structure, the tadpole device as central conflict, and the soothing reassurance of the omniscient narrator to guide us on our journey. A video game will always have scripted events and dialogue options, because the professional designers and writers matter, as they tend to know better than their audiences that rely on the people with big ideas for what works and what doesn't. But the participants matter too, especially in a game. Whether it's something like 13 Sentinels where the player dictates not the content, but the continuity of the story, or a character action game where personal expression is valued over just getting to the next checkpoint. The core challenge of a game is in developing a unique approach for unique experiences within common circumstances. It's the emergent gameplay variables that make divergent paths more interesting, because you feel as though you have played active participation in causing a tear in the fabric of time and space that ripples and reverberates far and wide, rather than merely arriving upon a predetermined destination with a forced confrontation with a gatekeeper boss fight. An RPG of this caliber lets you use intuition and improv to see things through, or to skip entire timelines and even bloodlines, creating some situations previously unforeseen and unthinkable. There are definitely big surprises waiting for you, obstacles that must be dealt with to proceed. But how you prepare for it or prevent these challenges and what you do in the heat of the moment is entirely up to you. It's the nature of what games can and should be. Games are designed to see what the player can come up with when left to their own gameplay devices, not to be vehicles to force-feed pandering ideology and recycled movie tropes from the staff writers that have been elevated too far up the company ladder onto the paying public. The story should be as prominent in a game as the players want to invest in it. So should the gameplay segments. Going a step forward is making even main encounters an optional task, or at least providing optional approaches to complete them. This is the true value of min-maxing. You know, whenever you come across a big bad and you wonder if there could just be a way to talk yourself out of it, especially when the game seems to be leaning in that direction. You can do that in Baldur's Gate 3 and still earn the full XP without getting your hair musty. Sure, fighting the full battle out might be more exhilarating of a challenge, but just having the potential to make life easier for yourself feels so empowering in itself. And like in life and in any game of dice, you don't always win, but when you miss your mark, sometimes you do enjoy yourself more if you lose. BG3 joins the ranks of games like Metal Gear Solid and Hitman, which are both primarily stealth games, and giving player choice in combat scenarios. It joins contemporary games like The Witcher 3 in developing professional prose poetry and memorable, satisfactory quest lines that involve you in orchestrating the conclusions. As party members go, the companions feel as fleshed out, literally and figuratively, as many JRPG bosom buddies do. And of course, these friends love to share a bosom or two. The main story, while not philosophically deep, is inspired in wit, humor, and the sheer outrageousness of it all. I'm not sure anyone has been more fucked than the Baldur's Gate boys and girls.
I'm not sure anyone has ever been more fucked.
It's a plot that is first stupid and by the end, stupendous. The exploration is rewarding not only for the novelty of discovery, but for the gainful awareness of tactical advantages and disadvantages that become available by learning your surroundings and getting to know your build components. The traversal is for the tactician, and there's always something new to find in places new and familiar. It goes without saying that BG3 is a great game. Its proficiency in every single aspect of game design is self-indicative. Its writing is the stuff of true storytelling, a form of escapism with humor and humanity, with a fascination and focus on what is happening and what will happen next, not spending time meditating magniloquently on what was or what could have been, except for some scenes that do come across as a bit too much, but that depends on who intrigues you the most and who you invest in. Its characters are generally believable in the context of fantasy and are just as fun as they are foreign. The art style is elegant, both technically impressive and transparent enough to let characterization shine through the motion capture performances. Songs like Down by the River, Raphael's Final Act, and my personal favorite in this game, Nine Blades, speak for themselves. And the theatrical voice acting is among some of the finest ever recorded in a video game. The stuff that in combination with the physical acting would win awards in any other medium as well. The question of whether it deserves the hyperbolic title of masterpiece is more debatable. There are sure to be minor nitpicks about even some of its major components, but for those I find there could be equal counterpoints thrown the other way. Unquestionably though, Baldur's Gate 3 is as solid as it is malleable to player whims. As a tactical RPG, surely it boasts a traditional style of combat that won't hold everyone's attention span at first glance. It is indeed slow and methodical, especially on the higher difficulties such as the one I played through entirely, the aptly named Tactician. It's both testing and tedious, particularly for how much time there is to wait in between moves, when the AI has delays in figuring out what to do and where. Waiting for the dice to roll behind the curtain means that time is wasted on finding out the outcome of the probability. And while this lends itself to new experiences for every single encounter, it could simply use something like the fast-forward feature from the Persona games. Turn-based is tedious, but Atlas makes it as momentous and flashy as it can be presented to us. In a top-down isometric setting, it could only make sense to prioritize this style of combat. It simply doesn't make any sense to incorporate hack-and-slash gameplay in the form of games like Diablo into this format when fully 3D action games are the standard. But here in Baldur's Gate 3, we witness one of the most beautiful and detailed worlds ever made from a top-down view, both in the aesthetics and, when taken into account, the breadth of what can be found. Special credit for the bodies that never despawn and the environmental damages that never disappear. The fact that the camera is variable to zoom in or out is perfect for the immersion. It makes you want to explore even when, like The Witcher 3, eventually you come across a lot of the same duplicate collectibles that take up space and require the obligatory inventory management time loss. At least the items in this game go a lot further, with so many possibilities for gear and improvisational tools, and food being the primary source of refreshment for the camp supplies, which readily restore HP and SP. The game is very generous with these supplies, and I ended up with an excess of almost 3,000 camp supplies and about 16k gold by the end of my tactician run. The game is difficult but fair, and you can always make things harder or easier with self-imposed restrictions. But there's enough potential cheese methods to help anyone get through the game on almost any mode, provided the dice rolls aren't too unlucky for you.
That's it.
Wow, you got a 1? Dude, you rolled a 1 and then you got 20 bonus.
The game is particularly generous with the save scumming, of course, and perhaps the most important game to save scum ever made outside of Ninja Gaiden. Of course, they completely nerfed the safety net for honor mode, but outside of players with complete knowledge of tactics, that mode is bullshit anyway and should not be attempted without sheer confidence in everything that you do. Tactician mode is the satisfying compromise between balanced and challenging. But the fact that you can save the state of the game virtually any time and under any condition is a remarkable display of technical prowess and an awesome feature for quality of life. Being able to save scum before, after, and even during an important boss fight or dialogue sequence is a breath of fresh air, and a step further in cementing Baldur's Gate 3 is one of the best games ever made for player choice. It's your oyster to manipulate in however you want. Now, one of the problems associated with constantly saving is that Baldur's Gate 3 does turn into a bit of a loading screen simulator, which does account for probably 5 to 10% of anyone's total playing time, potentially more if you substantially rewrite your status as you go. In contrast to this, the main quests themselves and the areas that comprise them aren't spectacularly long or large. The game is pretty evenly paced and structured through 3 acts, and it isn't necessarily mind-blowing, or should I say mind-flaying, how the game turns out in the end, but I would say most quests end on a wholesome and satisfactory note, particularly the variations of the good endings. Like any great story with great characters, you feel both full and empty when it's over, like a good bowl of spaghetti. I did feel as though the world design itself was lacking that true sandbox feel, especially in Act 2, which can be a nuisance to navigate because of the Shadow Curse modifier. In this regard, I don't think Baldur's Gate 3 is a straight 10 out of 10. Even Baldur's Gate itself as a location isn't anything nearly as captivating as visiting Leyndell, the royal capital, for the first time. Baldur's Gate is certainly no Tucson either, at least not by appearances. Sure, there are densely packed NPCs and storefronts to examine, but the scale of adventure is degraded a bit here. It's the combat situations and the dialogue permutations that keep things interesting, but there are moments where I feel either particularly overwhelmed or perhaps underwhelmed with just exploring, rather than being able to stop and appreciate the flow. There's always an element of feeling pressed for time in an RPG, but there's almost an issue of there being too much of a good thing in Baldur's Gate 3 while also not being enough sometimes. The possible outcomes of all interactions are innumerable, and therefore it would not be possible for even the most hardcore OCD gamer to view every scenario without many hundreds of hours and a multitude of playthroughs. This is a true double-edged sword. Yet, when you do take a chance to find what's hidden, much of what's been left behind to find is consequential, like reading a book that tells you what part of the body to kiss a mind flayer for maximum erogenous activity, or replaying a passage from a book that leads to a companion becoming a god later on. As Raphael would say, the devil is in the details. So while Baldur's Gate 3 is not the most interesting game on the macro level, on the micro level, it is very well impressive. There has been criticism directed towards the romance options in the game, particularly that they don't matter because every NPC is horny, and it's harder to get Will to dance than it is to get some sex. But I find this to be a shallow way of looking at the companion arcs themselves, because although everyone is easy and bisexual by design, there is special attention paid to the different personalities if you listen closely and follow along. In my experience, Karlach, for example, is one of the most passionate characters and one of the sweetest if you get to know her. Going on a first date with her is a perfect romantic moment, serving as a reminder of adventures that you've been on together, and a slice of life showcasing the quirks and the relatable soft side of the writers and the actress gave this tiefling barbarian. Playing as a Dark Urge character, there are so many special scenes and interactions with everyone from the camp crew to Withers and the game's main villains. There's the famous speech that Astarion gives you after you resist the urge at Baal's temple that I think only comes if you romance him. You have the chance to watch Karlach die a destined death or intervene to prevent fate from taking your fellow soldier too soon. Listening to Shadowheart's devout worship and helping to break her free from the mind control of her religion is surely an aspect of character development that feels more impactful, as a tight bond has been developed once you've gotten her a little loose. The sex isn't too serious, but the characters are memorable and dynamic, and that's what counts the most. Let's not forget about the ultimate companionship, being able to co-op with a friend or four. Having a buddy come into your world and troll around with you and being able to leave their custom character around for you to use to your advantage just opens up yet another dimension of customization and replayability for BG3. Just as any two characters can be across the map from one another doing their own thing, your friend is sort of with you, even when they're not. The progression system is perhaps held back by a faithfulness to Dungeons & Dragons rules, and the level cap of 12 is a bit premature. It gets to a point where you no longer need experience points, and so some fights are entirely pointless outside of the potential loot drops that they might provide you, or how they might change the story. Having no new game plus is also a bit of a blunder, I feel, because one of the best aspects of RPGs is getting really overpowered early and finding ways to break the game completely. You could still find ways to do this with perfect preparation, but some of the really cool features like the Dark Urge Slayer form can only be accessed in late game stages, or the Mind Flayer form, of course, by which time there's a little choice to get your fill, especially given that you can't return to previous areas of the game beyond Act 3. Multi-classing a character is great, but having to constantly respec to find the right spell or attack that you want could have been simplified even a bit further. Think of something like Neo 2 and the ability to save entire builds and swap them out in a moment's notice. A different kind of RPG, but no less complex a system to analyze. Baldur's Gate 3 boasts some of the best and most unpredictable gameplay in its genre, but its individual mechanics are not the deepest to be found in such games. Yet, it's not so much what you have to use, but how you can use it that makes Baldur's Gate 3 an experience worth tinkering with. Not every area of the game is perfect, but every aspect is exceptionally designed, and there may not be just one strength that stands out the most. Like a good JRPG, it's the intersection of all of the different aspects that makes Baldur's Gate 3 great and accessible, even for people that have lower attention spans and don't love reading and keeping count on whose turn is next. The Witcher 3 is no masterpiece for its lackluster and laborious combat. Baldur's Gate 3 never falls into the pit traps of triviality along those lines because there are many approaches to dealing with a problem, and though combat is turn-based, it can take on many forms both within and adjacent to pointing and clicking. It's comparable to Witcher 3 in the same aspects that game gets credit for and does even better in the development of encounter design by making combat rewarding and not just a means to an end, because every combat situation is a test of wits, tactics, and your creativity. And like Witcher 3, its dialogue and quest writing is superb, but the main story is not as deeply resonant as the drama or romance that other stories in the medium possess. But maybe that's because it remembers how much of its DNA is D&D, and that the real goal is to know your role. It's not possible to do just anything in a video game, but Baldur's Gate 3 gives you lots of ideas and memories worth, depending on all the ways that you can roll the dice.
You have it saved,
Yeah, I'll save
Give me a
it.
sec.
What
You
is it?
pull out his sword and say, "You want to save real quick, bud?"
Did you see?
Oh, so when I showed up to her, she was like, "This is unacceptable. Fuck you," and tried to kill me. So me and NC cleverly outplayed her and killed her and took all her clothes off.
Nice.
If you want,
Nice.
after in a bit, I
It's the fatal flaw of mortal kind. Take away their free will and they call you a tyrant. Allow them to indulge it and they become tyrants.